From a letter by J.R.R. Tolkien to Milton Waldman, 1951. My dear Milton, you asked for a brief sketch of my stuff that is connected with my imaginary world. It is difficult to say anything without saying too much. The attempt to say a few words opens a floodgate of excitement. The egoist and artist at once desires to say how the stuff has grown, what it is like, and what, he thinks, he means or is trying to represent by it all. I shall inflict some of this on you, but I will append a mere resume of its contents, which is, maybe, all that you want or will have use or time for. In order of time, growth, and composition, this stuff began with me, though I do not suppose that is of much interest to anyone but myself. I mean, I do not remember a time when I was not building it. Many children make up, or begin to make up, imaginary languages. I have been at it since I could write, but I have never stopped. And, of course, as a professional philologist, especially interested in linguistic aesthetics, I have changed in taste, improved in theory, and probably in craft. Behind my stories is now a nexus of languages, mostly only structurally sketched. But to those creatures, which in English I call misleadingly elves, are assigned two related languages more nearly completed, whose history is written, and whose forms, representing two different sides of my own linguistic taste, are deduced scientifically from a common origin. Out of these languages are made nearly all the names that appear in my legends. This gives a certain character, a cohesion, a consistency of linguistic style, and an illusion of historicity to the nomenclature. Or so I believe. That is markedly lacking in other comparable things. Not all will feel this as important as I do, since I am cursed by acute sensibility in such matters. But an equally basic passion of mine, ab initio, was for myth, not allegory, and for fairy story, and above all, for heroic legend on the brink of fairy tale and history, of which there is far too little in the world, accessible to me, for my appetite. I was an undergraduate before thought and experience revealed to me that these were not divergent interests, opposite poles of science and romance, but integrally related. I am not learned, though I have thought about them a good deal, in the matters of myth and fairy story. However, for in such things, as far as known to me, I have always been seeking material, things of a certain tone and air, and not simple knowledge. Also, and here I hope I shall not sound absurd, I was, from early days, grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It had no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought and found as an ingredient in legends of other lands. There was Greek and Celtic and Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian, and Finnish, which greatly affected me, but nothing English, save impoverished chapbook stuff. Of course there was and is all the Arthurian world, but powerful as it is imperfectly naturalized, associated with the soil of Britain, but not with English, and does not replace what I felt to be missing. For one thing, its fairy is too lavish and fantastical, incoherent and repetitive. For another and more important thing, it is involved in and explicitly contains the Christian religion. For reasons which I will not elaborate, that seems to me fatal. Myth and fairy story must, as all art, reflect and contain in solution elements of moral and religious truth or error, but not explicit, not in the known form of the primary real world. I'm speaking, of course, of our present situation, not of ancient pagan pre-Christian days. And I will not repeat what I tried to say in my essay which you read. Do not laugh. But once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen, I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story. The larger founded on the lesser in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country. It should possess the tone and quality that I desired, somewhat cool and clear, be redolent of our air, the clime and soil of the northwest, meaning Britain and the hither parts of Europe, not Italy or the Aegean, still less the east, and while possessing, if I could achieve it, the fair, elusive beauty that some call Celtic, though it is rarely found in genuine ancient Celtic things. It should be high, purged of the gross, and fit for the more adult mind of a land long now steeped in poetry. I would draw some of the great tales in fullness, and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole, and yet leave scope for other minds and hands, wielding paint and music and drama. Absurd. Of course, such an overweening purpose did not develop all at once. The mere stories were the thing. They arose in my mind as given things, and as they came separately, so too the links grew. An absorbing, though continually interrupted labor, especially since, even apart from the necessities of life, the mind would wing to the other pole and spend itself on the linguistics. Yet always I had the sense of recording what was already there, somewhere, not of inventing. Of course I made up and even wrote lots of other things, especially for my children. Some escaped from the grasp of this branching, acquisitive theme, being ultimately and radically unrelated. Leaf by Niggle and Farmer Giles, for instance, the only two that have been printed. The Hobbit, which has much more essential life in it, was quite independently conceived. I did not know as I began it that it belonged. But it proved to be the discovery of the completion of the whole, its mode of descent to earth and merging into history. As the high legends of the beginnings are supposed to look at things through elvish minds, so the middle tale of The Hobbit takes a virtually human point of view, and the last tale blends them. I dislike allegory, the conscious and intentional allegory, yet any attempt to explain the purport of myth or fairy tale must use allegorical language. And of course, the more life a story has, the more readily will it be susceptible of allegorical interpretations, while the better a deliberate allegory is made, the more nearly will it be acceptable just as a story. Anyway, all this stuff is mainly concerned with fall, mortality, and the machine. It is, I suppose, fundamentally concerned with the problem of the relation of art and subcreation and primary reality. With fall, inevitably, and that motive occurs in several modes. With mortality, especially as it affects art and the creative, or as I should say, subcreative, desire, which seems to have no biological function and to be apart from the satisfactions of plain, ordinary, biological life with which, in our world, it is indeed usually at strife. This desire is at once wedded to a passionate love of the real primary world, and hence filled with the sense of mortality, and yet unsatisfied by it. It has various opportunities of fall. It may become possessive, clinging to the things made as its own. The sub-creator wishes to be the lord and god of his private creation. He will rebel against the laws of the creator, especially against mortality. Both of these, alone or together, will lead to the desire for power, for making the will more quickly effective, and so to the machine, or magic. By the last, I intend all use of external plans or devices, apparatus, instead of developments of the inherent inner powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world or coercing other wills. The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized. I have not used magic consistently, and indeed the elven queen Galadriel is obliged to remonstrate with the hobbits on their confused use of the word, both for the devices and operations of the enemy, and for those of the elves. I have not, because there is not a word for the latter, since all human stories have suffered the same confusion. But the elves are there, in my tales, to demonstrate the difference. Their magic is art, delivered from many of its human limitations, more effortless, more quick, more complete, product and vision in unflawed correspondence. And its object is art, not power, subcreation, not domination, and tyrannous reforming of creation. The elves are immortal, at least as far as this world goes, and hence are concerned rather with the griefs and burdens of deathlessness in time and change than with death. The enemy in successive forms is always naturally concerned with sheer domination, and so the lord of magic and machines. But the problem that this frightful evil can and does arise from an apparently good root, the desire to benefit the world and others, speedily and according to the benefactor's own plans, is a recurrent motive. Not in the beginner of evil, his was a subcreative fall, and hence the elves, the representatives of subcreation par excellence, were peculiarly his enemies, and the special object of his desire and hate, and open to his deceits. Their fall is into possessiveness, and, to a less degree, into perversion of their art to power. The cycles begin with a cosmogonical myth, the music of the Ainur. God and the Valar, or powers Englished as gods, are revealed. These latter are, as we should say, angelic powers, whose function is to exercise delegated authority in their spheres, of rule and government, not creation, making or remaking. They are divine, that is, were originally outside and existed before the making of the world. Their power and wisdom is derived from their knowledge of the cosmogonical drama, which they perceived first as a drama, that is, as in a fashion we perceive a story composed by someone else, and later as a reality. On the side of mere narrative device, this is, of course, meant to provide beings of the same order of beauty, power, and majesty as the gods of higher mythology, which can yet be accepted, well, shall we say, boldly, by a mind that believes in the blessed Trinity. It moves then swiftly to the history of the elves, or the Silmarillion proper, to the world as we perceive it, but of course transfigured in a still half-mythical mode. That is, it deals with rational incarnate creatures of more or less comparable stature with our own. The knowledge of the creation drama was incomplete in each individual god, and incomplete if all the knowledge of the pantheon were pooled. For, partly to redress the evil of the rebel Melkor, partly for the completion of all in an ultimate finesse of detail, the Creator had not revealed all. The making and nature of the children of God were the two chief secrets. All that the gods knew was that they would come at appointed times. The children of God are thus primevally related and akin, and primevally different. Since also they are something wholly other to the gods, in the making of which the gods played no part, they are the object of the special desire and love of the gods. These are the firstborn, the elves, and the followers, men. The doom of the elves is to be immortal, to love the beauty of the world, to bring it to full flower with their gifts of delicacy and perfection, to last while it lasts, never leaving it even when slain, but returning, and yet when the followers come, to teach them and make way for them, to fade as the followers grow and absorb the life from which both proceed. The doom, or the gift of men, is mortality, freedom from the circles of the world. Since the point of view of the whole cycle is the elvish, mortality is not explained mythically. It is a mystery of God, of which no more is known than that what God has purposed for men is hidden, a grief and an envy to the immortal elves. As I say, the legendary Silmarillion is peculiar and differs from all similar things that I know in not being anthropocentric. Its center of view and interest is not men, but elves. Men come in inevitably. After all, the author is a man, and if he has an audience, they will be men, and men must come into our tales as such, and not merely transfigured or partially represented as elves, dwarves, hobbits, etc. But they remain peripheral, latecomers, and, however growingly important, not principals. In the cosmogony there is a fall of angels, we should say, though quite different in form, of course, to that of Christian myth. These tales are new. They are not directly derived from other myths and legends, but they must inevitably contain a large measure of ancient, widespread motives or elements. After all, I believe that legends and myths are largely made of truth, and indeed present aspects of it that can only be received in this mode. And long ago, certain truths and modes of this kind were discovered and must always reappear. There cannot be any story without a fall. All stories are ultimately about the fall, at least not for human minds as we know them and have them. So, proceeding, the elves have a fall before their history can become storial. The first fall of man, for reasons explained, nowhere appears. Men do not come on the stage until all that is long past, and there is only a rumor that for a while they fell under the domination of the enemy, and that some repented. The main body of the tale, the Silmarillion proper, is about the fall of the most gifted kindred of the elves, their exile from Valinor, a kind of paradise, the home of the gods, in the furthest west, their re-entry into Middle-earth, the land of their birth but long under the rule of the enemy, and their strife with him. The power of evil still visibly incarnate. It receives its name because the events are all threaded upon the fate and significance of the Silmarillion, radiance of pure light, or primeval jewels. By the making of gems, the sub-creative function of the elves is chiefly symbolized, but the Silmarillion were more than just beautiful things as such. There was light. There was the light of Valinor, made visible in the two trees of silver and gold. As far as all this has symbolical or allegorical significance, light is such a primeval symbol in the nature of the universe that it can hardly be analyzed. The light of Valinor, derived from light before any fall, is the light of art, undivorced from reason, that sees things both scientifically or philosophically and imaginatively or subcreatively, and says that they are good as beautiful. The light of sun or moon is derived from the trees only after they were sullied by evil. These were slain by the enemy out of malice, and Valinor was darkened, though from them, ere they died utterly, were derived the lights of sun and moon. A marked difference here between these legends and most others is that the sun is not a divine symbol, but a second-best thing, and the light of the sun, the world under the sun, become terms for a fallen world and a dislocated, imperfect vision. But the chief artificer of the elves, Feanor, had imprisoned the light of Valinor in the three supreme jewels, the Silmarillion, before the trees were sullied or slain. This light thus lived thereafter only in these gems. The fall of the elves comes about through the possessive attitude of Feanor and his 7 sons to these gems. They are captured by the enemy, set in his iron crown, and guarded in his impenetrable stronghold. The sons of Feanor take a terrible and blasphemous oath of enmity and vengeance against all or any, even of the gods, who dares to claim any part or right in the Silmarillion. They pervert the greater part of their kindred, who rebel against the gods and depart from paradise and go to make hopeless war upon the enemy. The first fruit of their fall is war in paradise, the slaying of elves by elves, and this and their evil oath dogs all their later heroism, generating treacheries and undoing all victories. The Silmarillion is the history of the war of the exiled elves against the enemy, which all takes place in the northwest of the world, Middle-earth. Several tales of victory and tragedy are caught up in it, but it ends with catastrophe and the passing of the ancient world, the world of the long First Age. The jewels are recovered by the final intervention of the gods, only to be lost forever to the elves, one in the sea, one in the deeps of earth, and one as a star of heaven. This legendarium ends with a vision of the end of the world, its breaking and remaking, and the recovery of the Silmarillion, and the light before the sun, after a final battle which owes, I suppose, more to the Norse vision of Ragnarok than to anything else, though it is not much like it. As the stories become less mythical and more like stories and romances, men are interwoven. For the most part, these are good men, families and their chiefs, who, rejecting the service of evil and hearing rumors of the gods of the West and the High Elves, flee westward and come into contact with the exiled elves in the midst of their war. The men who appear are mainly those of the three houses of the fathers of men, whose chieftains become allies of the elf lords. The contact of men and elves already foreshadows the history of the later ages, and a recurrent theme is the idea that in men, as they now are, there is a strand of blood and inheritance derived from the elves, and that the art and poetry of men is largely dependent on it, or modified by it. Of course, in reality, this only means that my elves are only a representation or an apprehension of a part of human nature, but that is not the legendary mode of talking. There are, thus, two marriages of mortal and elf, both later coalescing in the kindred of Erandil, represented by Elrond the half-elven, who appears in all the stories, even The Hobbit. The chief of the stories of the Silmarillion, and the one most fully treated, is the story of Beren and Lúthien the Elf Maiden. Here we meet, among other things, the first example of the motive, to become dominant in hobbits, that the great policies of world history, the wheels of the world, are often turned not by the lords and governors, even gods, but by the seemingly unknown and weak, owing to the secret life in creation and the part unknowable to all wisdom but one, that resides in the intrusions of the children of God into the drama. It is Beren, the outlawed mortal, who succeeds, with the help of Lúthien, a mere maiden even if an elf of royalty, where all the armies and warriors have failed. He penetrates the stronghold of the enemy and wrests one of the Silmarilli from the Iron Crown. Thus he wins the hand of Lúthien, and the first marriage of mortal and immortal is achieved. As such, the story is, I think, a beautiful and powerful, heroic fairy romance, receivable in itself with only a very general, vague knowledge of the background. But it is also a fundamental link in the cycle, deprived of its full significance out of its place therein. For the capture of the Silmaril, a supreme victory, leads to disaster. The oath of the sons of Fëanor becomes operative, and lust for the Silmaril brings all the kingdoms of the elves to ruin. There are other stories almost equally full in treatment and equally independent, and yet linked to the general history. There is The Children of Húrin, the tragic tale of Túrin Túrumba and his sister Niniel, of which Túrin is the hero. A figure that might be said, by people who like that sort of thing, though it is not very useful, to be derived from elements in Sigurd, the Volsung, Oedipus, and the Finnish Kullervo. There is the Fall of Gondolin, the chief elvish stronghold, and the tale or tales of Eärendil, the Wanderer. He is important as the person who brings the Silmarillion to its end, and as providing in his offspring the main links to and persons in the tales of later ages. His function as a representative of both kindreds, elves and men, is to find a sea passage back to the land of the gods, and as ambassador persuade them to take thought again for the exiles, to pity them and rescue them from the enemy. His wife Elwing descends from Luthien, and still possesses the Silmaril. But the curse still works, and Earendil's home is destroyed by the sons of Feanor. But this provides the solution. Elwing, casting herself into the sea to save the jewel, comes to Earendil, and with the power of the great gem they pass at last to Valinor, and accomplish their errand at the cost of never being allowed to return or dwell again with elves or men. The gods then move again, and great power comes out of the west, and the stronghold of the enemy is destroyed, and he himself is thrust out of the world into the void, never to reappear there in incarnate form again. The remaining 2 Silmarils are regained from the Iron Crown, only to be lost. The last 2 sons of Feanor, compelled by their oath, steal them and are destroyed by them, casting themselves into the sea and the pits of the earth. The ship of Earendil, adorned with the last Silmaril, is set in heaven as the brightest star. So ends the Silmarillion and the tales of the First Age. The next cycle deals, or would deal, with the Second Age, but it is on Earth a dark age, and not very much of its history is, or need be told. In the great battles against the first enemy, the lands were broken and ruined, and the west of Middle-earth became desolate. We learn that the exiled elves were, if not commanded, at least sternly counselled to return into the west, and there be at peace. They were not to dwell permanently in Valinor again, but in the lonely isle of Eressëa, within sight of the Blessed Realm. The men of the 3 houses were rewarded for their valor and faithful alliance, by being allowed to dwell westernmost of all mortals in the great Atlantis Isle of Númenor. The doom, or gift of God of mortality, the gods of course cannot abrogate, but the Númenorians have a great span of life. They set sail and leave Middle-earth and establish a great kingdom of mariners, just within furthest sight of Eressëa, but not of Valinor. Most of the High Elves depart also back into the west. Not all. Some men akin to the Númenorians remain in the land not far from the shores of the sea. Some of the exiles will not return, or delay their return, for the way west is ever open to the immortals, and in the Grey Havens ships are ever ready to sail away forever. Also, the orcs, goblins, and other monsters bred by the first enemy are not wholly destroyed. And there is Sauron. In the Silmarillion and Tales of the First Age, Sauron was a being of Valinor perverted to the service of the enemy and becoming his chief captain and servant. He repents in fear when the first enemy is utterly defeated, but in the end does not do as was commanded, return to the judgment of the gods. He lingers in Middle-earth, very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth. Neglected by the gods, he becomes a reincarnation of evil, and a thing lusting for complete power, and so consumed ever more fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. All through the twilight of the Second Age, the shadow is growing in the east of Middle-earth, spreading its sway more and more over men, who multiply as the elves begin to fade. The 3 main themes are thus the delaying elves that lingered in Middle-earth, Sauron's growth to a new Dark Lord, master and god of men, and Numenor Atlantis. They are dealt with analytically, and in two tales or accounts, the Rings of Power and the Downfall of Numenor. Both are the essential background to The Hobbit and its sequel. In the first, we see a sort of second fall, or at least error, of the elves. There was nothing wrong, essentially, in their lingering against counsel, still, sadly, with the mortal lands of their old heroic deeds. Some words of the original manuscript were omitted by the typist in this sentence. But they wanted to have their cake without eating it. They wanted the peace and bliss and the perfect memory of the West, and yet to remain on the ordinary earth where their prestige as the highest people above wild elves, dwarves, and men was greater than at the bottom of the hierarchy of Valinor. They thus became obsessed with fading, the mode in which the changes of time, the law of the world under the sun, was perceived by them. They became sad, and their art, shall we say, antiquarian, and their efforts all really a kind of embalming, even though they also retained the old motive of their kind, the adornment of earth, and the healing of its hurts. We hear of a lingering kingdom in the extreme northwest, more or less in what was left in the old lands of the Silmarillion, under Gil-galad, and of other settlements, such as Imladris, Rivendell, near Elrond, and a great one at Eregion, at the western feet of the Misty Mountains, adjacent to the mines of Moria, the major realm of the dwarves in the Second Age. There arose a friendship between the usually hostile folk of elves and dwarves for the first and only time, and smithcraft reached its highest development, but many of the elves listened to Sauron. He was still fair in that early time, and his motives and those of the elves seemed to go partly together. The healing of the desolate lands. Sauron found their weak point in suggesting that, helping one another, they could make Western Middle-earth as beautiful as Valinor. It was really a veiled attack on the gods, an incitement to try and make a separate, independent paradise. Gil-galad repulsed all such overtures, as also did Elrond. But at Eregion, great work began, and the elves came their nearest to falling to magic and machinery. With the aid of Sauron's law, they made rings of power. Power is an ominous and sinister word in all these tales, except as applied to the gods. The chief power of all the rings alike was the prevention or slowing of decay, i.e., change, viewed as a regrettable thing. The preservation of what is desired or loved or its semblance. This is more or less an elvish motive. But also they enhanced the natural powers of a possessor, thus approaching magic, a motive easily corruptible into evil, a lust for domination. And finally, they had other powers more directly derived from Sauron, the necromancer, so he is called, as he casts a fleeting shadow and presage on the pages of The Hobbit, such as rendering invisible the material body and making things of the invisible world visible. The elves of Eregion made 3 supremely beautiful and powerful rings, almost solely of their own imagination, and directed to the preservation of beauty. They did not confer invisibility. But secretly in the subterranean fire in his own black land, Sauron made one ring, the ruling ring, that contained the powers of all the others and controlled them, so that its wearer could see the thoughts of all those that used the lesser rings, could govern all that they did, and in the end could utterly enslave them. He reckoned, however, without the wisdom and subtle perceptions of the elves. The moment he assumed the one, they were aware of it, and of his secret purpose, and were afraid. They hid the three rings so that not even Sauron ever discovered where they were, and they remained unsullied. The others they tried to destroy. In the resulting war between Sauron and the elves, Middle-earth, especially in the west, was further ruined. Eregion was captured and destroyed, and Sauron seized many rings of power. These he gave for their ultimate corruption and enslavement to those who would accept them out of ambition or greed. Hence the ancient rhyme that appears as the leitmotif of the Lord of the Rings. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. Sauron became thus almost supreme in Middle-earth. The elves held out in secret places not yet revealed. The last elf kingdom of Gil-galad is maintained precariously on the extreme west shores where are the havens of the ships. Elrond, the half-elven son of Earendil, maintains a kind of enchanted sanctuary at Imladris, in English Rivendell, on the extreme eastern margin of the western lands. Elrond symbolizes throughout the ancient wisdom, and his house represents law, the preservation in reverent memory of all tradition concerning the good, wise, and beautiful. It is not a scene of action, but of reflection. Thus it is a place visited on the way to all deeds or adventures. It may prove to be on the direct road as in The Hobbit, but it may be necessary to go from there in a totally unexpected course, so necessarily in The Lord of the Rings. Having escaped to Elrond from the imminent pursuit of present evil, the hero departs in a wholly new direction, to go and face it at its source. But Sauron dominates all the multiplying hordes of men that have had no contact with the elves, and so indirectly with the true and unfallen Valar and gods. He rules a growing empire from the great dark tower of Barad-dûr in Mordor, near to the mountain of fire, wielding the One Ring. But to achieve this, he had been obliged to let a great part of his own inherent power, a frequent and very significant motive in myth and fairy story, pass into the One Ring. While he wore it, his power on earth was actually enhanced, but even if he did not wear it, that power existed and was in rapport with himself. He was not diminished, unless some other seized it and became possessed of it. If that happened, the new possessor could, if sufficiently strong and heroic by nature, challenge Sauron, become master of all that he had learned or done since the making of the One Ring, and so overthrow him and usurp his place. This was the essential weakness he had introduced into his situation in his effort, largely unsuccessful, to enslave the elves, and in his desire to establish a control over the minds and wills of his servants. There was another weakness. If the One Ring was actually unmade, annihilated, then its power would be dissolved. Sauron's own being would be diminished to vanishing point, and he would be reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will. But that he never contemplated nor feared. The ring was unbreakable by any smithcraft less than his own. It was indissoluble in any fire save the undying subterranean fire where it was made, and that was unapproachable in Mordor. Also, so great was the ring's power of lust that anyone who used it became mastered by it. It was beyond the strength of any will, even his own, to injure it, cast it away, or neglect it, so he thought. It was, in any case, on his finger. Thus, as the Second Age draws on, we have a great kingdom and evil theocracy, for Sauron is also the god of his slaves, growing up in Middle-earth. In the west, actually the northwest is the only part clearly envisaged in these tales, lie the precarious refuges of the elves, while men in those parts remain more or less uncorrupted, if ignorant. The better and nobler sort of men are, in fact, the kin of those that had departed to Númenor, but remain in a simple Homeric state of patriarchal and tribal life. Meanwhile, Númenor has grown in wealth, wisdom, and glory under its lines of great kings of long life, directly descended from Elros, Earendil's son, brother of Elrond. The downfall of Númenor, the second fall of man, or man rehabilitated but still mortal, brings on the catastrophic end not only of the Second Age, but of the old world, the primeval world of legend envisaged as flat and bounded, after which the Third Age began, a twilight age, a medium aevum, the first of the broken and changed world, the last of the lingering dominion of visible, fully incarnate elves, and the last also in which evil assumes a single dominant incarnate shape. The downfall is partly the result of an inner weakness in men, consequent, if you will, upon the first fall, unrecorded in these tales, repented but not finally healed. Reward on earth is more dangerous for men than punishment. The fall is achieved by the cunning of Sauron in exploiting this weakness. Its central theme is, inevitably I think, in a story of men, a ban or prohibition. The Númenóreans dwell within far sight of the easternmost immortal land, Erisea, and, as the only men to speak an elvish tongue, learned in the days of their alliance, they are in constant communication with their ancient friends and allies, either in the bliss of Erisea or in the kingdom of Gil-galad on the shores of Middle-earth. They became thus, in appearance and even in powers of mind, hardly distinguishable from the elves, but they remained mortal, even though rewarded by a triple, or more than a triple, span of years. Their reward is their undoing, or the means of their temptation. Their long life aids their achievements in art and wisdom, but breeds a possessive attitude to these things, and desire awakes for more time for their enjoyment. Foreseeing this in part, the gods laid a ban on the Númenóreans from the beginning. They must never sail to Erisea, nor westward out of sight of their own land. In all other directions they could go as they would. They must not set foot on immortal lands, and so become enamored of an immortality within the world which was against their law, the special doom or gift of Iluvatar, God, and which their nature could not, in fact, endure. The view is taken, as clearly reappears later in the case of the hobbits that have the ring for a while, that each kind has a natural span, integral to its biological and spiritual nature. This cannot really be increased qualitatively or quantitatively, so that prolongation in time is like stretching a wire out ever tauter or spreading butter ever thinner. It becomes an intolerable torment. There are 3 phases in their fall from grace. First, acquiescence, obedience that is free and willing, though without complete understanding. Then, for long they obey unwillingly, murmuring more and more openly. Finally, they rebel, and a rift appears between the king's men and rebels and the small minority of persecuted faithful. In the first stage, being men of peace, their courage is devoted to sea voyages. As descendants of Earendil, they became the supreme mariners, and being barred from the west, they sailed to the uttermost north, and south and east. Mostly they come to the west shores of Middle-earth, where they aid the elves and men against Sauron and incur his undying hatred. In those days they would come amongst wild men as almost divine benefactors, bringing gifts of arts and knowledge, and passing away again, leaving many legends behind of kings and gods out of the sunset. In the second stage, the days of pride and glory and grudging of the HarperCollins presents The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, edited by Christopher Tolkien, read by Andy Serkis. Preface to the second edition. Probably towards the end of 1951, when The Lord of the Rings was completed but difficulties lay in the way of its publication, my father wrote a very long letter to his friend Milton Waldman, at that time an editor at the publishing house of Collins. The context and occasion of this letter lay in the painful differences that arose over my father's insistence that the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings should be published in conjunction or in connection as one long saga of the jewels and the rings. There is, however, no need to enter into this matter here. The letter that he wrote with a view to justifying and explaining his contention emerged as a brilliant exposition of his conception of the earlier ages. The latter part of the letter, as he himself said, was no more than a long and yet bald resume of the narrative of The Lord of the Rings, and it is for this reason that I believe that it merits inclusion within the covers of the Silmarillion, as is done in this edition. The original letter is lost, but Milton Waldman had a typescript made of it and sent a copy to my father. It was from this copy that the letter was printed, in part, in The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, 1981, number 131. The text given here is that in letters, pages 143 to 157, with minor corrections and the omission of some of the footnotes. There were many errors in the typescript, especially in names. These were very largely corrected by my father, but he did not observe the sentence on page Roman numerals 23, "There was nothing wrong essentially in their lingering against counsel, still sadly with the mortal lands of their old heroic deeds." Here the typist certainly omitted words in the manuscript, and perhaps misread those given as well. I have removed a number of errors in the text and index which until now have escaped correction in the hardback printings only of the Silmarillion. Chief among these are those that concern the numbering in sequence of certain of the rulers of Númenor. For these errors and an explanation of how they arose, see Unfinished Tales, 1980, page 226, note 11, and The Peoples of Middle-earth, 1996, page 154, section 31. Christopher Tolkien, 1999. Cuenta Silmarillion, the history of the Silmarils. Vala Cuenta. Vala Cuenta. Account of the Valar and Maiar according to the lore of the Eldar. In the beginning, Eru, the One, who in the Elvish tongue is named Ilúvatar, made the Ainur of his thought, and they made a great music before him. In this music the world was begun, for Ilúvatar made visible the song of the Ainur, and they beheld it as a light in the darkness. And many among them became enamored of its beauty and of its history, which they saw beginning and unfolding as in a vision. Therefore Ilúvatar gave to their vision being, and set it amid the void, and the secret fire was sent to burn at the heart of the world, and it was called Ear. Then those of the Ainur who desired it arose, and entered into the world at the beginning of time, and it was their task to achieve it, and by their labours to fulfil the vision which they had seen. Long they laboured in the regions of Ea, which are vast beyond the thought of elves and men, until in the time appointed was made Arda, the kingdom of earth. Then they put on the raiment of earth, and descended into it, and dwelt therein. Of the Valar. The great among these spirits, the elves name the Valar, the powers of Arda, and men have often called them gods. The lords of the Valar are 7, and the Valier, the queens of the Valar, are 7 also. These were their names in the Elvish tongue as it was spoken in Valinor, though they have other names in the speech of the elves in Middle-earth, and their names among men are manifold. The names of the lords in due order are Manwe, Ulmo, Aule, Orome, Mandos, Lorien, and Tulkas, and the names of the queens are Varda, Yavanna, Niena, Esther, Vaere, Vana, and Nessa. Melkor is counted no longer among the Valar, and his name is not spoken upon earth. Manwe and Melkor were brethren in the thought of Ilúvatar. The mightiest of those Ainur who came into the world was in his beginning Melkor. But Manwe is dearest to Ilúvatar and understands most clearly his purposes. He was appointed to be, in the fullness of time, the first of all kings, lord of the realm of Arda and ruler of all that dwell therein. In Arda his delight is in the winds and the clouds, and in all the regions of the air, from the heights to the depths, from the utmost borders of the Vale of Arda to the breezes that blow in the grass. Sullimo he is surnamed, Lord of the breath of Arda. All swift birds, strong of wing, he loves, and they come and go at his bidding. With Manwe dwells Varda, Lady of the Stars, who knows all the regions of Ea. Too great is her beauty to be declared in the words of men or of elves, for the light of Ilúvatar lives still in her face. In light is her power and her joy. Out of the deeps of Ea she came to the aid of Manwe, for Melkor she knew from before the making of the music and rejected him, and he hated her and feared her more than all others whom Eru made. Manwe and Varda are seldom parted, and they remain in Valinor. Their halls are above the everlasting snow, upon Oiolosse, the uttermost tower of Taniquetil, tallest of all the mountains upon earth. When Manwe there ascends his throne and looks forth, if Varda is beside him, he sees further than all other eyes through mist and through darkness and over the leagues of the sea. And if Manwe is with her, Varda hears more clearly than all other ears the sounds of voices that cry from east to west, from the hills and the valleys, and from the dark places that Melkor has made upon earth. Of all the great ones who dwell in this world, the elves hold Varda most in reverence and love. Elbereth they name her, and they call upon her name out of the shadows of Middle-earth, and uplift it in song at the rising of the stars. Ulmo is the lord of waters. He is alone. He dwells nowhere long, but moves as he will in all the deep waters about the earth or under the earth. He is next in might to Manwe, And before Valinor was made, he was closest to him in friendship. But thereafter he went seldom to the councils of the Valar, unless great matters were in debate. For he kept all Arda in thought, and he has no need of any resting place. Moreover, he does not love to walk upon land, and will seldom clothe himself in a body after the manner of his peers. If the children of Eru beheld him, they were filled with a great dread. For the arising of the king of the sea was terrible, as a mounting wave that strides to the land, with dark helm, foam-crested, and raiment of mail shimmering from silver down into shadows of green. The trumpets of Manwë are loud, but Ulmo's voice is deep as the deeps of the ocean, which he only has seen. Nonetheless, Ulmo loves both elves and men, and never abandoned them, not even when they lay under the wrath of the Valar. At times he will come unseen to the shores of Middle-earth, or pass far inland, up firths of the sea, and there make music upon his great horns, the Ulumuri, that are wrought of white shell, and those to whom that music comes hear it ever after in their hearts, and longing for the sea never leaves them again. But mostly Ulmo speaks to those who dwell in Middle-earth with voices that are heard only as the music of water. For all seas, lakes, rivers, fountains, and springs are in his government, so that the elves say that the spirit of Ulmo runs in all the veins of the world. Thus news comes to Ulmo, even in the deeps, of all the needs and griefs of Arda, which otherwise would be hidden from Manwë. Aule has might little less than Ulmo. His lordship is over all the substances of which Arda is made. In the beginning he wrought much in fellowship with Manwë and Ulmo, and the fashioning of all lands was his labour. He is a smith and a master of all crafts, and he delights in works of skill, however small, as much as in the mighty building of old. His are the gems that lie deep in the earth, and the gold that is fair in the hand, no less than the walls of the mountains and the basins of the sea. The Noldor learned most of him, and he was ever their friend. Melkor was jealous of him, for Aule was most like himself in thought and in powers, and there was long strife between them, in which Melkor ever marred or undid the works of Aule, and Aule grew weary in repairing the tumults and disorders of Melkor. Both also desired to make things of their own that should be new and unthought of by others, and delighted in the praise of their skill. But Aule remained faithful to Eru, and submitted all that he did to his will, and he did not envy the works of others, but sought and gave counsel. Whereas Melkor spent his spirit in envy and hate, until at last he could make nothing save in mockery of the thought of others, and all their works he destroyed if he could. The spouse of Aule is Yavanna, the giver of fruits. She is the lover of all things that grow in the earth, and all their countless forms she holds in her mind, from the trees like towers in forests long ago, to the moss upon stones, or the small and secret things in the mould. In reverence, Yavanna is next to Vada among the queens of the Valar. In the form of a woman she is tall and robed in green, but at times she takes other shapes. Some there are who have seen her standing like a tree under heaven, crowned with the sun, and from all its branches there spilled a golden dew upon the barren earth, and it grew green with corn. but the roots of the tree were in the waters of Ulmo, and the winds of Manwe spoke in its leaves. Kementari, Queen of the Earth, she is surnamed in the Eldarin tongue. The Feanturi, masters of spirits, are brethren, and they are called most often Mandos and Lorien. Yet these are rightly the names of the places of their dwelling, and their true names are Namo and Irmo. Namo, the elder, dwells in Mandos, which is westward in Valinor. He is the keeper of the houses of the dead, and the summoner of the spirits of the slain. He forgets nothing, and he knows all things that shall be, save only those that lie still in the freedom of Ilúvatar. He is the doomsman of the Valar, but he pronounces his dooms and his judgments only at the bidding of Manwe. Vaere, the weaver, is his spouse, who weaves all things that have ever been in time into her storied webs, and the halls of Mandos that ever widen as the ages pass are clothed with them. Irmo the younger is the master of visions and dreams. In Lorien are his gardens in the land of the Valar, and they are the fairest of all places in the world, filled with many spirits. Esther the gentle, healer of hurts and of weariness, is his spouse. Grey is her raiment, and rest is her gift. She walks not by day, but sleeps upon an island in the tree-shadowed lake of Lorelin. From the fountains of Irmo and Esther, all those who dwell in Valinor draw refreshment, and often the Valar come themselves to Lorien, and there find repose and easing of the burden of Arda. Mightier than Esther is Nienna, sister of the Feanturi. She dwells alone. She is acquainted with grief, and mourns for every wound that Arda has suffered in the marring of Melkor. So great was her sorrow as the music unfolded, that her song turned to lamentation long before its end, and the sound of mourning was woven into the themes of the world before it began. But she does not weep for herself, and those who hearken to her learn pity and endurance in hope. Her halls are west of west, upon the borders of the world, and she comes seldom to the city of Valimar, where all is glad. She goes rather to the halls of Mandos, which are near to her own, and all those who wait in Mandos cry to her, for she brings strength to the spirit, and turns sorrow to wisdom. The windows of her house look outward from the walls of the world. Greatest in strength and deeds of prowess is Tulkas, who is surnamed Astaldo the Valiant. He came last to Arda to aid the Valar in the first battles with Melkor. He delights in wrestling and in contests of strength, and he rides no steed, for he can outrun all things that go on feet, and he is tireless. His hair and beard are golden, and his flesh ruddy. His weapons are his hands. He has little heed for either the past or the future, and is of no avail as a counsellor, but is a hardy friend. His spouse is Nessa, the sister of Orome, and she also is lithe and fleet-footed. Deer she loves, and they follow her train whenever she goes in the wild. But she can outrun them, swift as an arrow with the wind in her hair. In dancing she delights, and she dances in Valimar on lawns of never-fading green. Orome is a mighty lord. If he is less strong than Tulkas, he is more dreadful in anger. Whereas Tulkas laughs ever in sport or in war, and even in the face of Melkor he laughed in battles before the elves were born. Orome loved the lands of Middle-earth, and he left them unwillingly, and came last to Valinor. And often of old he passed back east over the mountains and returned with his host to the hills and the plains. He is a hunter of monsters and fell beasts, and he delights in horses and in hounds, and all trees he loves, for which reason he is called Aldaron, and by the Sindar Tauron, the Lord of Forests. Nahar is the name of his horse, white in the sun and shining silver at night. The Valaroma is the name of his great horn, the sound of which is like the upgoing of the sun in scarlet, or the sheer lightning cleaving the clouds. Above all the horns of his host, it was heard in the woods that Yavanna brought forth in Valinor, for there Orome would train his folk and his beasts for the pursuit of the evil creatures of Melkor. The spouse of Orome is Vana, the ever young. She is the younger sister of Yavanna. All flowers spring as she passes, and open if she glances upon them, and all birds sing at her coming. These are the names of the Valar and the Valier, and here is told in brief their likenesses, such as the Eldar beheld them in Aman. But fair and noble as were the forms in which they were manifest to the children of Ilúvatar, they were but a veil upon their beauty and their power. And if little is here said of all that the Eldar once knew, that is as nothing compared with their true being, which goes back into regions and ages far beyond our thought. Among them, 9 were of chief power and reverence, but 1 is removed from their number, and 8 remain. The Aratar, the high ones of Arda, Manwe and Varda, Ulmo, Yavanna, and Aule, Mandos, Niena, and Orome. Though Manwe is their king, and holds their allegiance under Eru, in majesty they are peers, surpassing beyond compare all others, whether of the Valar and the Maiar, or of any other order that Ilúvatar has sent into Ea. Of the Maiar. With the Valar came other spirits, whose being also began before the world, of the same order as the Valar, but of less degree. These are the Maiar, the people of the Valar, and their servants and helpers. Their number is not known to the elves, and few have names in any of the tongues of the children of Ilúvatar. For though it is otherwise in Aman, in Middle-earth, the Maiar have seldom appeared in form visible to elves and men. Chief among the Maiar of Valinor, whose names are remembered in the histories of the elder days, are Ilmare, the handmaid of Varda, and Eonwe, the banner-bearer and herald of Manwe, whose might in arms is surpassed by none in Arda. But of all the Maiar, Osse and Winen are best known to the children of Ilúvatar. Osse is a vassal of Ulmo, and he is master of the seas that wash the shores of Middle-earth. He does not go in the deeps, but loves the coasts and the isles, and rejoices in the winds of Manwe. For in storm he delights, and laughs amid the roaring of the waves. His spouse is Winen, the lady of the seas, whose hair lies spread through all waters under sky. all creatures she loves that live in the salt streams, and all weeds that grow there. To her mariners cry, for she can lay calm upon the waves, restraining the wildness of Osse. The Númenóreans lived long in her protection, and held her in reverence equal to the Valar. Melkor hated the sea, for he could not subdue it. It is said that in the making of Arda, he endeavored to draw Osse to his allegiance, promising to him all the realm and power of Ulmo if he would serve him. So it was that long ago there arose great tumults in the sea that wrought ruin to the lands. But Weenin, at the prayer of Aule, restrained Osse and brought him before Ulmo. And he was pardoned and returned to his allegiance, to which he has remained faithful, for the most part. For the delight in violence has never wholly departed from him, and at times he will rage in his wilfulness without any command from Ulmo his lord. Therefore those who dwell by the sea or go up in ships may love him, but they do not trust him. Melian was the name of a Maya who served both Vana and Este. She dwelt long in Lorien, tending the trees that flower in the gardens of Ermo, ere she came to Middle-earth. Nightingales sang about her wherever she went. Wisest of the Maya was Olorin. He too dwelt in Lorien, but his ways took him often to the house of Niena, and of her he learnt pity and patience. Of Melian much is told in the Quenta Silmarillion, but of Olorin that tale does not speak, for though he loved the elves, he walked among them unseen, or in form as one of them, and they did not know whence came the fair visions or the promptings of wisdom that he put into their hearts. In later days he was the friend of all the children of Ilúvatar, and took pity on their sorrows, and those who listened to him awoke from despair and put away the imaginations of darkness. Of the enemies. Last of all is set the name of Melkor, he who arises in might. But that name he has forfeited, and the Noldor, who among the elves suffered most from his malice, will not utter it, and they name him Morgoth, the dark enemy of the world. Great might was given to him by Ilúvatar, and he was co-evil with Manwë. In the powers and knowledge of all the other Valar he had part, but he turned them to evil purposes and squandered his strength in violence and tyranny. For he coveted Arda and all that was in it, desiring the kingship of Manwë and dominion over the realms of his peers. From splendor he fell through arrogance to contempt for all things save himself, a spirit wasteful and pitiless. Understanding he turned to subtlety and perverting to his own will all that he would use, until he became a liar without shame. He began with the desire of light, but when he could not possess it for himself alone, he descended through fire and wrath into a great burning down into darkness. And darkness he used most in his evil works upon Arda, and filled it with fear for all living things. Yet so great was the power of his uprising that in ages forgotten he contended with Manwë and all the Valar, and through long years in Arda held dominion over most of the lands of the earth. But he was not alone, for of the Maiar many were drawn to his splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness. And others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valaraukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs, demons of terror. Among those of his servants that have names, the greatest was that spirit whom the Eldar called Sauron, or Gotaur the Cruel. In his beginning, he was of the Maya of Aule, and he remained mighty in the lore of that people. In all the deeds of Melkor the Morgoth upon Arda, in his vast works and in the deceits of his cunning, Sauron had a part, and was only less evil than his master in that for long he served another and not himself. But in after years he rose like a shadow of Morgoth, and a ghost of his malice, and walked behind him on the same ruinous path down into the void. Here ends the Valaquenta.